November 8, 1942. The rocky coastline near Oran, Algeria, churned with the metallic clatter of landing craft disgorging American infantry onto hostile beaches. Among the equipment hauled ashore that morning was a weapon most of the soldiers had never fired, never trained with, and whose very existence General Dwight Eisenhower had learned about only hours earlier with considerable alarm. The 2.36-inch rocket launcher M1, already nicknamed the Bazooka after radio comedian Bob Burns' makeshift trombone, had been rushed into production just 6 months prior and shipped to Operation Torch Forces as an afterthought. The olive-drab tubes, 54 inches long and weighing 13 pounds unloaded, looked to many soldiers like plumbing fixtures hastily repurposed for war. In the confusion of those first days fighting Vichy French forces and the arriving German reinforcements, several bazookas fell into enemy hands. Wehrmacht salvage teams, moving methodically through captured American positions, recovered the tubes along with their M6 rockets and shipped them eastward for technical evaluation. German engineers in Berlin examined the weapons with professional interest tinged with skepticism. The device seemed almost comically simple: a steel tube, a wooden stock, a battery-powered ignition system, and wire mesh sights that appeared to have been fabricated from coat hangers. The rocket itself carried a 60mm shaped charge warhead containing 8 ounces of pentolite explosive. To German ordnance specialists accustomed to the engineering precision of their own anti-tank weapons, the bazooka embodied everything they had been taught to expect from American industry: crude, mass-produced, prioritizing quantity and speed of manufacture over sophisticated design. The initial German assessment reports circulated through Wehrmacht headquarters with barely concealed condescension. Here was confirmation of what propaganda had long proclaimed: American military equipment represented assembly line thinking applied to warfare, adequate perhaps for poorly trained conscripts but fundamentally inferior to German engineering excellence. The shaped charge principle itself was not revolutionary. German engineers had been experimenting with hollow charge munitions for years. What struck them as peculiar was the delivery mechanism, a simple tube that any infantryman could operate, requiring no complex training or specialized expertise. It seemed almost whimsical, a toy disguised as a weapon. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. This dismissive attitude found reinforcement in early combat reports from North Africa. American forces, hastily committed to battle with minimal training and equipment they barely understood, achieved negligible success with the bazooka during the Tunisian campaign. The M6 rockets proved notoriously unreliable, misfiring or failing to detonate with frustrating regularity. The battery-powered ignition system failed in desert heat and moisture. An American general touring the Tunisian front in the spring of 1943, after the Axis surrender, could not locate a single soldier who could report that the weapon had actually stopped a German tank. In May 1943, further issue of bazookas to American forces was suspended pending significant improvements to both launcher and ammunition. German tankers who encountered bazookas during those North African battles reported the weapons with amused dismissal. The rockets lacked sufficient velocity to reliably penetrate the frontal armor of even medium tanks like the Panzer IV, let alone the heavier types entering service. The pointed nose of the M6 rocket tended to deflect harmlessly off-sloped armor at oblique angles. The weapon's maximum effective range, officially listed as 250 yards but practically much less, meant bazooka teams had to close to suicidally short distances to engage tanks, exposing themselves to machine gun fire and accompanying infantry. The few rockets that did strike home often failed to achieve penetration or caused only superficial damage. To crews of the formidable Tiger I heavy tanks beginning to arrive in Tunisia, the notion that American infantry might threaten their 60-ton armored fortresses with shoulder-fired tubes seemed almost laughable. Yet beneath this confident dismissal, German ordnance specialists recognized potential in the basic concept. The ability to provide infantry with portable anti-tank capability, however primitive the American execution, addressed a genuine tactical need. While German engineers publicly derided the bazooka's crude simplicity, they simultaneously initiated development of their own version, the Raketen Panzerbuks, rapidly nicknamed Panzerschreck or Tank Terror. The German design would retain the fundamental tube-launched rocket principle while correcting what they perceived as American design failures: a larger 88mm warhead for improved penetration, a magneto-based electrical firing system for reliability, and more robust construction throughout. That the Germans chose to copy and enlarge the weapon rather than dismiss it entirely revealed a pragmatic respect for the underlying concept, even as official reports continued emphasizing American technical inadequacy. The propaganda apparatus of the Reich seized upon captured bazookas as evidence supporting established narratives. Photographs of German soldiers examining the weapons appeared in newsreels and military publications, accompanied by commentary emphasizing American technological backwardness. The message reinforced comfortable assumptions. German forces possessed superior training, superior equipment, and superior fighting spirit. The Americans might produce vast quantities of mediocre weapons, but German quality would always triumph over Allied quantity. This psychological framework, this belief in inherent German technical and tactical superiority, colored every subsequent encounter with American forces and their equipment. The bazooka entered the historical record, therefore, carrying a burden of failure and mockery. Its disastrous debut in North Africa seemed to confirm that American ordnance designers, working under impossible time constraints and with limited understanding of modern armored warfare, had produced a weapon that looked fearsome on paper but proved ineffective in actual combat. German after-action reports from Tunisia dismissed it as a negligible threat. Training materials advised German tank crews to disregard the weapon unless presented with unusually favorable circumstances for its employment. The few American soldiers who had successfully used bazookas in North Africa, those who had achieved hits through driver's vision slots, engine grills, or other vulnerable points, were treated as statistical anomalies, lucky strikes that proved nothing about the weapon's actual utility. This contempt would prove premature and dangerous. Between the spring of 1943 and the summer of 1944, American ordnance engineers addressed virtually every deficiency that had plagued the weapon in Tunisia. The M1 model introduced improved electrical systems and simplified sighting arrangements. More critically, the M6A1 and M6A3 rockets replaced the unreliable original ammunition with rounds featuring blunted noses to prevent deflection, improved fuses for consistent detonation, and modified propellant charges that eliminated many of the misfires that had plagued earlier versions. The M9 launcher, entering production in October 1943, incorporated numerous refinements including a two-piece breakdown design for easier transport by airborne forces, a longer tube for improved accuracy and range, and a magneto-based ignition system that finally achieved reliable firing under field conditions. These improvements transformed the bazooka from an embarrassing failure into a genuinely capable infantry anti-tank weapon, though German intelligence, focused on their own superior Panzerschreck, largely failed to recognize the magnitude of these changes. By the time American forces prepared for the invasion of Sicily in July 1943, the weapon they carried bore little resemblance to the crude tubes that had failed so completely in Tunisia. Yet the reputation of that failure preceded them. German defenders in Sicily, including elements of the fearsome Schwerpanzerabteilung 504 equipped with 17 Tiger I heavy tanks, anticipated facing the same inadequate American equipment they had encountered and dismissed in North Africa. This assumption, this comfortable belief in American technical inferiority and German armored invulnerability, would soon be tested under the brutal sun of the Sicilian summer, where doctrine would collide with reality, and where long-held certainties about the nature of modern armored warfare would begin to fracture in ways that no one, on either side, fully anticipated. The M1 rocket launcher that came ashore with American forces in Sicily during Operation Husky bore the scars of hard lessons learned in North Africa. General Electric's Bridgeport facility had incorporated dozens of modifications based on combat feedback, transforming the weapon from the unreliable prototype that had embarrassed American forces in Tunisia. The revised electrical system eliminated the battery contact box that had proven vulnerable to moisture and sand, replacing it with a simplified wire connection that the loader attached manually before each shot. The wooden stock had been reinforced. The sights, while still rudimentary, had been recalibrated for the improved M601 rocket that accompanied the launcher into combat. Most critically, the rocket itself had been redesigned with a shortened propellant stick to reduce overpressure issues and a modified fuse that achieved far more consistent detonation. American infantry receiving these weapons in preparation for Sicily underwent training that the North Africa veterans had been denied. Small unit tactics emphasized patience over aggression. Bazooka teams learned to wait for favorable angles rather than engaging heavy armor frontally. They practiced firing from concealed positions, understanding that the substantial backblast and smoke signature would reveal their location immediately after shooting. They memorized the vulnerable points on German tanks, engine compartments, ammunition stowage areas, the thinner armor-protecting suspension components, and the vision blocks that allowed crews to see outside their steel fortresses. The rocket's shaped charge warhead, delivering its energy through a focused jet of molten copper rather than kinetic impact, could theoretically penetrate 3 inches of armor plate when striking perpendicular to the surface. Against sloped armor or at oblique angles, penetration degraded significantly, making shot placement critical. The 17 Tiger I tanks of Schwerpanzerabteilung 504 that deployed to Sicily represented the most formidable armored vehicles in the German arsenal. Each weighed 56 tons and mounted the legendary 88mm KWK-36L/56 gun that could destroy any Allied tank at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. The frontal armor measured 100 mm thick, effectively impervious to the bazooka's 3-inch penetration capability. Even the side armor, at 80 mm, exceeded what the American rocket could reliably penetrate at anything other than perfectly perpendicular angles. The Tiger's reputation preceded it. Allied tank crews had learned in Tunisia to avoid engaging Tigers directly, instead calling for artillery or air support when the massive vehicles appeared. German crews operated their machines with justified confidence, knowing that Allied tanks posed minimal threat and that infantry anti-tank weapons could be largely disregarded as nuisances rather than genuine dangers. The terrain of Sicily, however, differed dramatically from the open desert that had characterized North African fighting. Villages perched on hillsides, narrow roads wound through valleys flanked by stone buildings, and olive groves provided concealment that allowed infantry to approach tanks far more closely than desert warfare permitted. American commanders, learning from their costly education in Tunisia, adapted their tactics to exploit these environmental advantages. Bazooka teams received specific instructions to avoid open engagements, instead positioning themselves in buildings overlooking roads where Tigers would be forced to channel, or in concealed positions where they could fire at the thinner side and rear armor when tanks passed. The weapon's short range, now extended to 300 yards with the longer M1 tube but still effectively limited to 100 yards or less for reliable hits, became less of a disadvantage when the terrain itself forced close-quarters combat. Intelligence reports filtering back to German commanders in Sicily mentioned improved American anti-tank weapons but failed to emphasize the significance of the changes. The psychological framework remained intact. American infantry equipment was adequate at best, certainly nothing that could threaten the invincible Tigers. Tank crews continued operating with the aggressive confidence that had characterized their North African successes, advancing boldly through contested terrain with limited infantry support. The doctrine that had proven successful in the desert, using the Tiger's superior gun range to destroy enemy armor before it could close to effective firing distance, seemed equally applicable to Sicilian conditions. After all, a Tiger remained a Tiger, its armor proof against anything American infantry could carry, its gun capable of killing at distances where enemy soldiers could not even accurately spot the vehicle. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The collision between doctrine and reality occurred in dozens of small engagements across Sicily during July and August 1943. Tiger 131, belonging to the 504th Heavy Panzer Battalion, was struck multiple times by British 6-pounder anti-tank guns on April 21 near Jebel Jaffa in Tunisia, but that famous capture occurred before Sicily. In Sicily itself, the pattern repeated in villages whose names would never make historical records, a Tiger advancing confidently down a narrow street, its commander focused on engaging enemy tanks or anti-tank guns at distance, suddenly rocked by an explosion against its side armor as an American bazooka team fired from a second-story window or concealed alley. The first hit often failed to penetrate, the rocket striking at an oblique angle or hitting the thick side armor where the shaped charge could not burn through. But bazooka teams now carried multiple rockets, and doctrine emphasized firing in pairs, one team shooting to force the crew to button up and reduce visibility, the second team maneuvering for a better angle. The M101's improved reliability meant that rockets actually fired when triggers were pulled, actually detonated when they struck targets, and actually penetrated armor when conditions favored the attacker. German tank crews, accustomed to dismissing bazooka teams as negligible threats, discovered that the improved weapon could kill Tigers under specific circumstances. A rocket striking the driver's vision block, thick armored glass designed to stop rifle bullets but vulnerable to focused explosive force, could penetrate into the hull, killing or injuring the driver and setting off ammunition stowed nearby. A hit against the thinner 25mm armor protecting the engine deck could disable the Maybach HL-230 engine or rupture fuel lines, transforming the tank into an immobile pillbox. Side shots against the ammunition bins, if fired at near-perpendicular angles from close range, occasionally achieved catastrophic kills when the shaped charge jet ignited stored rounds. The Sicily campaign produced verified accounts of M101 bazookas destroying or disabling German armor, including one Tiger I knocked out by an improbable hit through the driver's vision slot, a lucky strike that nonetheless demonstrated the weapon's lethality when everything aligned perfectly. More commonly, bazookas achieved mobility kills, damaging tracks or road wheels and leaving tanks stranded for recovery crews. These successes remain statistical exceptions rather than routine occurrences. The vast majority of bazooka shots still failed to achieve significant effect against heavy armor. But the exceptions mattered psychologically. Tank crews who had operated with complete confidence now faced uncertainty. That shoulder-fired tube previously dismissed as harmless could, under specific circumstances, kill. the American infantry weapon that propaganda had taught them to disregard as evidence of technological backwardness had evolved into something genuinely threatening, forcing German tankers to modify their tactics, increase their caution, and acknowledge an uncomfortable truth. American engineering had corrected the bazooka's deficiencies far more effectively than German intelligence had recognized or German doctrine had accommodated. The German response to the bazooka's improved performance manifested not through official acknowledgement but through tactical adaptation born of necessity. Tank commanders in Italy following the Sicily campaign issued informal guidance emphasizing the need for infantry support when operating in urban terrain or areas offering concealment to enemy anti-tank teams. The Tigers of Schwerpanzerabteilung 504 and other heavy tank units began operating more cautiously, maintaining greater standoff distances when possible and avoiding the kind of aggressive solo advances through villages that had proven successful in North Africa's open desert. Crews learned to button up completely when traversing areas where American infantry might be concealed, sacrificing visibility for protection. The doctrine remained unchanged. Officially, the bazooka posed minimal threat, but the reality of combat forced adaptation that contradicted official assessments. American ordnance engineers continued refining the weapon throughout 1944. The M1 model, entering production in June 1944, incorporated further improvements including an optical reflector sight that replaced the crude iron sights of earlier versions and a redesigned tube coupling mechanism that improved reliability. Production numbers told a story of industrial commitment. By war's end, American factories had manufactured over 476,000 bazooka launchers of all types and more than 15 million rockets. This represented an enormous investment in a weapon system that German propaganda continued dismissing as inferior. The factories in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and other facilities across the United States produced bazookas with remarkable consistency, maintaining quality control across hundreds of thousands of units, a manufacturing achievement that itself contradicted German assumptions about American industrial capabilities prioritizing quantity over precision. The psychological impact on German forces extended beyond immediate tactical concerns. Captured German documents and post-war interrogations revealed a gradual erosion of the comfortable certainty that had characterized early war assessments of American equipment. The bazooka represented a broader pattern. American weapons systems that initially appeared crude or inadequate often evolved rapidly, incorporating combat lessons and achieving effectiveness that German intelligence consistently underestimated. The M4 Sherman tank, initially dismissed as inferior to German medium tanks, arrived in overwhelming numbers with improved variants mounting more powerful guns. American artillery, coordinated through sophisticated fire direction centers and supplied with seemingly inexhaustible ammunition, achieved devastating effectiveness. The pattern repeated across equipment categories, initial German superiority giving way to American numerical and qualitative advantages as the war progressed and American industry mobilized fully. The Panzerschreck that German forces developed from captured bazookas represented both acknowledgement and denial of American capabilities. The 88mm German version achieved superior penetration, approximately 100mm versus the bazooka's 76 to 102mm depending on the rocket variant, validating the underlying concept while simultaneously serving as evidence that German engineering had corrected American inadequacies. Approximately 300,000 Panzerschrecks were produced compared to the nearly 500,000 American bazookas, and the German weapon's greater weight and more dangerous backblast represented trade-offs that American designers had deliberately avoided in favor of portability and ease of use. The Panzerschreck's existence acknowledged that the tube-launched anti-tank rocket represented a genuinely valuable infantry weapon, even as German propaganda continued emphasizing that it required German engineering excellence to realize the concept's full potential. The broader significance of the bazooka's evolution illuminated fundamental truths about the nature of the war that German commanders proved reluctant to accept. American industrial capacity, once fully mobilized, could not only produce weapons in overwhelming quantities but could simultaneously incorporate modifications and improvements at a pace German industry could not match. The decentralized American system, multiple contractors producing components, extensive field testing generating feedback, rapid integration of lessons learned, proved more adaptive than Germany's more centralized but increasingly resource-constrained ordnance development process. By late 1944, as German factories struggled with raw material shortages, Allied bombing, and reliance on forced labor, American production lines operated at peak efficiency with skilled workers, abundant materials, and streamlined processes. The bazooka's story also revealed the danger of allowing ideology to override evidence. German assessments of American equipment remained colored by propaganda narratives even when combat results contradicted those narratives. Reports of improved bazooka effectiveness from Sicily and Italy were filed but failed to generate significant changes in training materials or tactical doctrine, because acknowledging American technical competence conflicted with established beliefs about Aryan superiority and American decadence. This institutional resistance to uncomfortable truths, this preference for maintaining ideologically comfortable narratives over accepting evidence-based reality, characterized German military decision-making increasingly as the war progressed. The same pattern that caused underestimation of the bazooka contributed to catastrophic strategic errors, underestimating Soviet industrial capacity, dismissing American fighting quality, assuming that superior German training and equipment would compensate for massive numerical disadvantages. Tank crews operating Tigers, Panthers, and other German armor during the final year of the war faced American infantry equipped with weapons that doctrine taught them to disregard but experience proved could kill. This cognitive dissonance, the gap between what they had been taught to believe and what they observed in combat, contributed to the broader demoralization affecting German forces as defeat became inevitable. Every bazooka hit that penetrated armor, every tank disabled by a weapon officially dismissed as ineffective, chipped away at the psychological framework that had sustained German military confidence. The realization that American infantry possessed genuinely capable anti-tank weapons forced acknowledgement of a larger, more disturbing truth: American forces were neither technically incompetent nor tactically inept, and German superiority existed primarily in propaganda rather than battlefield reality. The M1 Super Bazooka that entered development in October 1944 represented American recognition that even the improved M901 remained inadequate against late-war German armor. The 3.5-inch weapon, firing a significantly more powerful rocket, could penetrate double the armor of the 2.36-inch version. Critically, the M20's development was informed by examination of captured Panzerschrecks, demonstrating American willingness to learn from enemy designs, a humility that contrasted sharply with German reluctance to acknowledge that anything valuable could be learned from supposedly inferior opponents. The M20 arrived too late to see significant action in Europe but proved its worth in Korea, where it effectively engaged Soviet-supplied T-34 tanks that the smaller bazooka could not reliably penetrate. Post-war analysis by military historians emphasized the bazooka's significance not as a war-winning weapon but as an example of effective iterative design and rapid incorporation of combat feedback. The weapon that had failed so completely in Tunisia had been transformed through systematic engineering improvements into a genuinely useful infantry anti-tank system by Sicily, and continued evolving throughout the war. This capacity for rapid adaptation, for acknowledging failures, identifying solutions, and implementing changes quickly, characterized American military procurement at its best. The bazookas that American infantry carried into Germany in 1945 bore little resemblance to the crude tubes shipped to North Africa in 1942, yet retained the same fundamental simplicity that German engineers had initially dismissed as evidence of inadequacy. The legacy extended beyond World War II into the development of modern infantry anti-tank weapons. The shaped charge rocket delivered by a simple tube launcher became the template for systems like the M72 Law, the Soviet RPG series, and contemporary weapons like the At-4 and Javelin. Every infantryman carrying a shoulder-fired anti-tank weapon traces a direct lineage to Lieutenant Colonel Edward Yule's 1942 prototype tested by firing into the Potomac River. The fundamental insight, that infantry could effectively engage armor without requiring crew-served guns or vehicles, revolutionized ground combat tactics and forced tank designers to account for threats from dismounted soldiers carrying portable weapons. Modern reactive armor, spaced armor, and active protection systems all represent responses to the challenge posed by shaped charge infantry weapons that the bazooka pioneered. For the German troops who initially called bazookas toys, then encountered the improved versions in Sicily and beyond, the weapon represented a microcosm of their war experience, initial confidence giving way to uncertainty, comfortable assumptions shattered by uncomfortable realities, and the gradual recognition that the enemy they had been taught to despise possessed capabilities that doctrine had failed to acknowledge. The Tiger tanks that had dominated North African battlefields with impunity learned caution in Sicilian villages. The crews who had operated with complete confidence learned to fear the signature whoosh and smoke trail of an approaching rocket. And the propaganda that had assured them of American technical incompetence proved hollow when 2.36-inch rockets penetrated armor that doctrine insisted was impervious. The story that began with contemptuous dismissal ended with grudging respect born from hard experience. German troops never stopped calling American equipment crude or primitive in their letters and reports. The psychological investment in German superiority ran too deep for complete abandonment. But their actions revealed what their words would not acknowledge: they had learned to fear the toy that killed tigers. That fear, more than any official assessment or intelligence report, testified to the weapon's effectiveness and to the danger of allowing ideology to override evidence. In the calculus of warfare where reality ultimately adjudicates all theories, the bazooka had proven itself not through elegance of design or engineering sophistication, but through the simplest possible metric: it worked when it needed to, and it killed what it was designed to kill, and no amount of propaganda could argue with a dead tank crew or a burning tiger. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.